Welcome to Muffin Talk.
Kia ora and welcome to Muffin Talk. This program is brought to you by the initiative Titipounamu, Study and Joy. I'm pleased to welcome today Father Kevin Waldie to our broadcast. Father Kevin, a warm welcome and haere mai.
Good morning. It's lovely to be with you.
Father Kevin Waldie is a Marist father and lecturer at Titipounamu Catholic Theological College in Auckland. And Father Kevin has just returned from Brisbane. You have returned from the ACBA Conference in Association in ACTA. Father Kevin, a lot of abbreviations. Can you tell us what this is about?
Well, I'm a member of the Australian Catholic Biblical Association. So we have an annual meeting conference in one of the major cities of Australia. And we always have that meeting in association with the Australian Catholic Theological Association. So it's a very good way of getting to meet people in theological education, both biblical and theology, on an annual basis and catch up on what people are researching, what other things are happening in their academic institutions and things like that. So it's a great social gathering, but also an academic gathering.
So what was their main topic this time?
This time it was synodality. So the basic idea was that there's been a synthesis report that came out from Australia, and New Zealand produced one at the same time. But basically it was to see where we're at and how in our various disciplines like biblical or theology, we might comment on the meaning of synodality, really.
And the meaning of synodality in a biblical, from a biblical point of view, is that right?
Yep, that's basically what we were looking at. And I presented a paper looking at synodality through film and Luke's Gospel. So I used the film Cabrini, which was out earlier this year, and about her struggles with establishing her mission in New York, and how that then showed us what it is to listen and to be determined to fulfill your mission. And then, of course, obviously, Luke's Gospel puts a great deal of emphasis on the journey that we're all on. And so synhodos in Greek means to be on the way and meeting with people. So that was basically what I was doing, but the whole conference was really centered around that. And we had combined sessions early on, and we there heard from people who were at the synod in Rome, and they then reported on what went on and the different type of discussion and synod action that took place. So it was very interesting.
I found it great that you are using a film again, because we had these sessions on biblical studies and movies, and what do the movies mean, and how to find God in the dark. And
that's right.
Yes, we've done that with Titipounamu Study and Joy. So great to hear that you are using movies even for this conference. So I'm sure that this would light up the whole conference.
My colleagues in biblical always look forward to my presentation because I always have a film or a couple of films that I introduce in dialogue with some biblical texts.
Oh, wonderful. And tell me about the biblical texts. At the moment, there is still a lot of discussion on translations and biblical texts, because you have different approaches of where you're coming from, and sometimes it's one person who translates or who reviews it, and sometimes there are several people. Can you give us a little bit of an update? What's happening now between the biblical scholars? Is there a certain opinion?
Obviously, with regards to the lectionary, that most Episcopal conferences around the world are trying to decide on, especially in English at the moment, we of the Australian Catholic Biblical Association have been promoting the Revised New Jerusalem Bible. And that's because we think there's a bit of a continuity between the original lectionary that was the old JB of the 1960s, and then obviously went through some transition. So there's the new JB of the 1980s, but now in 2019, there was the release of the Revised New Jerusalem Bible. Now, obviously, there's something going on in the world as to what version of the Bible you might be using, say, for a lectionary. So I thought it was interesting yesterday that I read in Zenit that the Vatican has approved the lectionary for England, Wales, and Scotland. And that's the text they're using is the English Standard Version CE, which means the Catholic edition, because fundamentally the ESV comes out as a Protestant Bible.
What does ESV stand for? Sorry.
The English Standard Version Catholic edition. There is an issue now about that particular version. Now, most of us wouldn't go with that version, but England, Wales, and Scotland have accepted it, and Rome has now approved it. And I thought it was interesting that the comments that were made in Zenit yesterday say that this shift in adaptation or use of a new version aims to provide a more accurate translation of the original scriptures and enhance the clarity and proclamation of the texts during Mass. And then another little statement says, this is in order to see revised liturgical translations, and the Catholic Truth Society that's going to publish the English version for England, Scotland, and Wales says it emphasizes that these changes are intended to reflect advancements in biblical scholarship and to produce texts that are more faithful to the original languages. And I think that's basically what new translations are trying to do, is they're trying to bring them up to the standards of biblical criticism of the moment, and also trying to get perhaps a much more accurate rendition of the original language texts. Because for a while there, you know, the Jerusalem Bible in its revised edition of the 1980s went into a sort of a more open translation, if you like, with a bit of flexibility, but it had a flow about it. It's the idea of how do we capture the meaning of the original text, but put it in a way that communicates clearly to today's generation of readers and listeners. And I think that's the good thing, that the emphasis now is on how do we communicate the Word of God in a manner that is direct but beautiful and eloquent at the same time. And I think a lot of the translations then are taking note of scholarship, and, you know, I think there's something to recommend every translation in a way, but, you know, that's going to lead us into another area of discussion about the Revised New Jerusalem Bible.
You mentioned it is only England, Scotland, and Wales.
That's right.
What about the other English-speaking countries? Are they still deciding on it, or do they have a different solution?
Well, that came up at the conference that I was at just this last weekend, that we've received a message now from the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference. So ACBC, you know, they're going for all these little tags. So the Australian Catholic Biblical Conference has decided on using the Revised New Jerusalem Bible. And that is now going to be used by Australia, New Zealand, and Ireland. So that's an interesting move. Just like the three, England, Scotland, and Wales, now Australia, New Zealand, and Ireland are going to go with this new Henry Wansborough translation. I think various Episcopal conferences have to collaborate in order to make it more reasonably priced. You've got to, because you're going to have print significant volumes, but then you've got to find a publisher that will do this. And I'm sure, when you have lectionary readings, you are editing the text. So you have to have a bit of flexibility with regards to the publisher, how you can edit the text for a lectionary. And so that then is something that I think probably will be no problem with the Revised New Jerusalem Bible.
And the Vatican has to approve it at the end if it's a Catholic translation.
Yeah, and it will. So the England, Scotland, and Wales lectionary is going to come into use in Advent at the end of this year.
Oh, good, for the new church year.
Yeah, so for them, I'm not sure. I presume the situation will be now that Australia, New Zealand, and Ireland have decided to adopt the RNJB, that will have to go to Rome, and then Rome will release a statement that approves it, just as I read yesterday in Zenit that the Northern Hemisphere has got its approval. I don't foresee any problem with Rome approving the Revised New Jerusalem Bible.
Sounds good. Okay, I'm looking forward to reading the new Revised Jerusalem Bible. And so maybe for the next church year, we'll see something already, at least some part of it online, hopefully.
Hopefully. Yeah. Look, I think these things need to move quickly.
Yes.
And, because while translations are always going to change, and that was one of the points that we made at the conference I was at, no translation is going to be perfect, Yes. And so people have expectations that it'll be absolutely exactly what they need. But look, all scholars are going to argue about what the precise wording should be. Constantly when I'm teaching my classes, I say, look, I use the New Revised Standard Version in class, but that's the reference text. Sometimes I'll say, look, I wouldn't translate those verses exactly as the NRSV's got it. I personally, reading the Greek text, because I'm often talking about New Testament texts, I'd say, look, I think to make it clearer what those verses mean, I would translate it in this way.
I think that we just have to remind ourselves that even in our lifetimes, words change their meaning. Exactly. And that's only a lifetime. Imagine the Bible with 2,000 years and longer.
That's right. And I think you've got to take note of your audience. Yeah. What is the language that people of 2024 are using? And what do words that we once accepted, what do they mean to this generation? And so what you've got to do is got to be very conscious, and I think this is expressed in what we're thinking about now, is think of your audience, think of the Word of God as something precious, but it has to communicate its message to today's generation. And so therefore the translation has to speak in a way that they can understand more directly, but also in an eloquent way as well, because you want to retain the beauty of the original language.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Father Kevin. And I think in the next interview, we'll take some examples and see how differently you can translate them. I think that will be very interesting.
That'll be good.
So thank you very much for this interview. If there are any questions, please contact Titipounamu Study and Joy at www.studyjoy.nz. And we have plenty of interviews and videos also with Brother Karen and with Father Kevin Waldie. So for any questions on Bibles, we might be able to help you. At least we can contact the persons who can help. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Father Kevin, for coming to this interview.
You're very welcome, Beata.
Out there, heroic peace is calling. In the bonds of love we meet. For the world, a new day dawning and shine.